A surprising discovery has been made. An ancient letter from Roman official Aurelius Linus, who personally saw Jesus, offers a detailed description of his appearance. Linus, who frequently reported to Caesar, describes Jesus in a way that may challenge what we have always believed about him. Traditionally, paintings depict Jesus as fair-skinned, with blue eyes and long hair. But is that really what he looked like? Let's explore this ancient description and see if it changes our perception of Jesus. Much of what we know about Jesus' appearance comes from art and films, but we have little physical description from the Bible itself. Linus' letter, however, provides a first-hand account, making it a valuable piece of evidence. For centuries, Western art portrayed Jesus as fair-skinned with long wavy hair and blue eyes. However, the Bible doesn't describe his appearance, and early church leaders suggested that Jesus didn't have an extraordinary look. Church Father St. Augustine argued that how we picture Jesus doesn't affect our salvation. What matters is recognizing him as human. The earliest images of Jesus showed him as youthful and idealized. But after Emperor Constantine made Christianity official in the 4th century, depictions of Jesus shifted to show him with a beard. Scholars believe this change might be tied to relics like the Shroud of Turin, which some say depicts Christ's image. The letter from Linus, which is from around 30 AD, describes Jesus as having a noble face, light wavy hair, dark eyebrows, and intense blue eyes. His face showed wisdom, kindness, and no signs of anger. This description is supported by studies of the Shroud of Turin, which suggests Jesus was about 6 feet tall, had a soft face, and a straight nose, with physical features above average for his time. In short, Linus' letter paints a picture of Jesus that may be far different from the way he is often portrayed in popular art. In 1940, artist Warner Sallman painted Head of Christ, which became incredibly popular. It appeared on prints, plaques, bookmarks, greeting cards, clocks, mugs, and more, reaching hundreds of millions. Author Stephen Prothero said the image helped turn Jesus into a national icon in the U.S., recognized by people of all races and religions. He believes this image is now the most familiar image of Jesus worldwide, even more than Da Vinci's Last Supper. In the 1990s, a study funded by the Lilly Endowment explored how Sallman's art influenced religion in America. Art historian David Morgan led the research, publishing essays in a book called Icons of American Protestantism. He gathered over 500 personal stories. Most people said Sallman's painting looked exactly how they imagined Jesus. Morgan noted that the image looks almost like a photo, with soft lighting and blurred edges, like an old family portrait. Since Jesus is shown from the shoulders up with no background or other people, it creates a personal connection. His kind, gentle gaze also comforts many viewers. Though the Bible doesn't describe Jesus' appearance in detail, clues suggest he wore a simple wool tunic, sandals, and a cloak. Clothes were expensive then, so he likely wore worn-out garments. The Gospels say Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, and started his ministry around age 30. He looked so ordinary that Judas had to point him out to the soldiers. Some scholars say the book of Revelation hints that Jesus may have had dark skin and woolly hair. His hair is described as white like wool and his feet like polished bronze, though these are often seen as symbolic. Over time, Jesus' image in art has changed. Early Christians showed him as a young, beardless shepherd. One of the oldest images of Jesus, found in Roman catacombs about 200 years after his death, shows him as a kind, youthful figure. In 2018, an old painting of Jesus was found in a ruined church in southern Israel. It's from the 6th century and shows Jesus with short, curly hair and no beard, carrying a lamb on his shoulders. This look was common in the Eastern Byzantine Empire, especially in places like Egypt and Syria-Palestine. But starting from the 4th century, Western images of Jesus changed. He began to be shown with long hair, a beard, a halo, and wearing a long robe, often influenced by Greek and Roman gods like Zeus. One example is the 5th century mosaic in the Church of Santa Pudenziana in Rome. However, not all images of Jesus follow this Western style. Many cultures show Jesus in ways that reflect their own people. Some see him as black, Arab, or Hispanic. One famous relic linked to Jesus is the Shroud of Turin, revealed in 1354. Some believe it shows Jesus's face, but experts debate if it's real. In 2001, artist and Dr. Richard Neve worked with scientists from Israel and the UK to create a new image of Jesus. Using a first-century skull and computer modeling, they built a face based on what Jews from that time likely looked like. The result? A man about 5 feet 5 inches, with dark skin, dark eyes, and short curly hair. This version is seen by many scholars as a more accurate image of Jesus. Forensic anthropology, a science that studies bones and human traits, helped with this. Experts in this field also study genetics, ancient bones, and human evolution. Though forensic anthropology is usually used in crime cases, Neve used it to help answer a big question: what did Jesus really look like? Even the Bible gives clues. The book of Matthew hints that Jesus had typical Semitic features, common in Galilee during that time. The first step for Neve and his team was to get skulls from the area near Jerusalem, where Jesus lived. Israeli archaeologists had already found well-preserved skulls from that time and gave 3 of them to Neve for his research. Using CT scans, Neve got detailed X-ray images of the skulls. Experts used computer software and data about facial tissue to digitally rebuild the muscles and skin on one skull. Then, they made a 3D model and added clay to match the correct thickness of the face. Artificial skin, nose, lips, and eyelids were shaped based on the muscles. However, the skull couldn't show hair or skin color. So Neve's team looked at ancient drawings from the 1st century, which suggested Jesus had dark eyes, a beard, and likely short curly hair, unlike many traditional paintings that show him with long hair. The Bible also supports the idea of short hair, since Paul wrote that long hair on men was shameful, and he claimed to have seen Jesus. Studies also show that the average height of men from that time was about 5 feet 3 inches and around 110 pounds. Since Jesus worked as a carpenter until he was 30, he was likely muscular and looked older from working outdoors. Neve's lab created a model of Jesus as a strong, dark-skinned Middle Eastern man, very different from the European-looking portraits many grew up seeing. Still, not everyone agrees. In his 2018 book, What Did Jesus Look Like?, Taylor studied ancient texts and art. He concluded Jesus likely had brown eyes, dark brown or black hair, and olive skin, and was around 5 feet 5 inches. While this may be closer to reality, Taylor says we can never be completely sure what Jesus looked like. He notes that Jews from Galilee back then probably didn't have blonde hair or blue eyes. For centuries, people have debated Jesus's true appearance. While Western art often shows him as a tall, light-skinned man, history and science suggest he probably looked like a typical Jewish man of his time: shorter, stronger, and darker-skinned. A Dutch photographer and digital artist used advanced AI to help imagine what Jesus might have really looked like. The artist, who has experience with computer graphics and effects, used AI trained on thousands of photos and paintings of human faces. This tool blends different facial features based on the artist's input to create a new, realistic image. To build Jesus' face, the artist looked at different cultural depictions, from Byzantine and Renaissance art to Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi and the Shroud of Turin. He changed the ethnicity to match the Middle Eastern background Jesus would have had, giving him features and a hairstyle that fit the time and place. He also reduced Renaissance influence by adding elements from ancient mummy portraits. The result isn't an exact recreation, but more of an artistic guess of what Jesus may have looked like. Why don't we have images of Jesus from his time? Although Jesus changed the world with his teachings, no images from his time show what he looked like. This is different from Roman leaders like Caesar, whose faces were carved in statues and mosaics. One reason is that Jesus and his early followers were Jewish and followed the Old Testament law, including the 10 Commandments, which said not to make carved images. This was meant to stop idol worship, which was common then. God said, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image of anything in heaven, on earth, or in the waters." God wanted people to worship him, not images or idols. If you've seen stained glass, paintings, or statues of Jesus, they're based on the artist's imagination. One of the oldest known pictures of Jesus is from around 235 AD in Syria. It shows him healing a paralyzed man. Another ancient image in the Roman catacombs shows Jesus as a young man with no beard. About 400 years after Jesus was born, artists started showing him with a beard. In the early church, art helped teach Bible stories to people who couldn't read. Paintings and sculptures made it easier to remember Jesus' life. Since art was a big part of Roman culture, early Christians used it too. Roman, Greek, and Syrian styles influenced how Jesus was shown in art. Over time, artists painted Jesus differently based on their culture. For example, Rembrandt in the 1600s showed Jesus in a way that looked different from how artists did in the 10th century. This shows how the times and the artist's views shaped his image, like his hair, clothes, and face. We don't have any pictures of Jesus from his time. That reminds us God cares more about the heart than looks. When Samuel was choosing a new king, God said not to focus on appearance, because God sees the heart. Jesus also said, "Don't judge by appearances, but judge fairly." Even though Jesus' close followers like Matthew, Mark, Peter, and John wrote about him, they didn't describe what he looked like. They focused on his message and teachings. Jesus was seen as ordinary, not good-looking or popular. He was even mocked and spat on. But that shows us that looks don't define our worth. God's love does. We are made in his image. Sometimes it's easier to imagine Jesus as glowing with light than as a simple man. But we don't need to know what he looked like to feel his love or understand his sacrifice. One day, all who follow him will see him face to face, beyond time and space. Click the video on screen to learn more, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.